Hey, what's up, guys? I just want to keep you updated real quick. This is our new podcast called Bases Juiced. It's me and my good friend Josh. Josh is an editor and social media coordinator for Mets Mirage Online. He's worked in a number of other different avenues in the baseball realm. He's an absolute whiz. Some call him Fink. I'm going to call him Josh for now. But yeah, just check it out. We're going to just discuss tons of baseball. And for this episode solely, it's going to be about the Mets. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Let me know what you think.
All right, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Tom here with Tom Ria Sports. I'm with my good friend Josh. We're going to give you all the latest baseball stuff today. We're just going to discuss solely the Mets, their offseason, where they're heading, who might go where. So let's jump right into it, Josh. I know you're the Mets expert. The first thing I just kind of wanted to talk about was really Trevor Bauer and his possibility of landing with the Mets, the type of contract he might get, just really his market with the Mets specifically. We'll get on to him another time about where he might go elsewhere. But just with the Mets, tell me a little bit about where you think it makes sense for him with the Mets, how much, things like that.
I think him and the Mets have always made sense in this market due to the fact there really just aren't that many elite starting pitching options. And the Mets' biggest weakness this past season was their starting rotation.
Right.
They had Michael Waka and Rick Porcello making around 20 starts combined. So that is usually not a recipe for success.
Right.
And I think that they definitely could use Trevor Bauer. I think there was a point I was a little bit more reserved on it, but I've warmed up to the idea just given that the potential of a rotation with Trevor Bauer and Jacob deGrom is the sky's the limit on that, especially when at some point this season you're going to add Noah Syndergaard back into the rotation.
Now,
That would
he,
at some point give you a potential rotation of Jacob deGrom, Trevor Bauer, Syndergaard, Stroman, and David Peterson.
what type of, I know obviously there's a whole new regime there, which we'll get to, but what type of deal makes the most sense for Bauer with the Mets specifically? What type of deal would you like to see, and what deal do you think is realistic for the Mets with him?
So I'm personally wary of the long-term deal with Trevor Bauer. I do not know that I'm very inclined to give him a 6-year deal, which I think is what he is probably aiming for right now. I'd rather give him 4 years, 120, paying him 30 mil a season, rather than um, rather than going the route of giving him a 6-year, 150, 160 contract.
Right.
Now, with that being said, what I want is not going to matter, I don't think. And I think you're more likely looking at 6 years in the 150 range rather than the 4-year deal for 120. And I think and that scenario would allow you to get one of Springer or Real Muto as well.
So let's say he gets the money he wants, right? Bauer gets the 6-year deal. He gets, I'm just going to speculate, 175, 150, some big numbers. Steve Cohen, they throw the boat at him, they go all in, whatever. Do the Mets get anybody else, at least any big names, or is everybody off the table now?
Once you sign Trevor Bauer, I don't think that you're at that point yet where people become off the table. I mean, who knows where Trevor Bauer actually ranks on their, top choices for this offseason, because for all we know, Trevor Bauer will be the option they turn to seriously after losing out on Springer and Real Muto.
Mm-hmm.
Likelihood is, I think this has been alluded to already a decent amount, that their hope is to get James McCann as their catcher so that they can easily pursue Springer and Bauer together.
Right.
And your hope would be to have a new center fielder on opening day, a new catcher on opening day, and a new starting pitcher to go right behind Jacob deGrom in the rotation on opening day. If you get all three of those, I don't see how a Mets fan could look at the team and say it's a not successful offseason. And I think that's the goal. I think they want to fill all these holes if possible. And if they fail to fill one of them, by not being able to get really more so Bauer or Springer, I think they will turn to LeMahieu if he has not already signed.
What do you think the realistic possibility is for the Mets to get that dream scenario where they get Springer, McCann, and Bauer. Like, give me a percent. You think that's like 50%, 30%, higher, lower? Like the real percentage of them actually pulling that off? Because to me, like on the outside, that sounds very unlikely. But I'm curious to you from the inside, just what percent you think that is.
I think you're at least looking at like a 40% chance.
Really? Okay.
I don't think I think your chances of getting one of them is almost 100%.
Me
I
too.
think
That I agree with. I definitely agree
that
with that.
that I don't see Steve Cohen walking away this offseason without saying, "Oh yeah, we didn't get one of them. We'll try again next offseason."
Right.
No,
Right.
the plan is going to be they're getting at least one.
Right.
And the likelihood is next offseason, when the shortstop market becomes insane, they are going to go crazy on that as well.
Right.
One of them will end up with the Mets. And this offseason, one of these big free agents, minimum, ends up with the Mets. I think your chances of getting two diminishes if it's Real Muto. I think
Right.
because at that point, you have to spread the wealth a little bit more financially with the rest of the options. And then you need a starting pitch. You need at least one starting pitcher at that point, and then you'll also need a center fielder and really an infielder as well, preferably.
Right.
So I don't see how you could possibly go for Bauer or Springer after signing Real Muto successfully. I think you put yourself in a little bit of a bind there. I mean, you could get one of them, I suppose, but if you want the perfect scenario of improving at catcher, center field, and pitcher in one clean swoop, it's Springer, Bauer, and McCann.
That's an absolute dream. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the way you improve the most holes right off the bat.
Right. Honestly, I mean, just thinking about it as you're talking, to me, just without like digging super deep into the research and stuff, I kind of feel that the most likely of those three, in my opinion, is probably McCann. I think he's more than likely, to me, you might disagree. I think he's the most likely to end up as a Met. Something about Springer, I'm just not sure of. I feel like somebody's going to swoop in there and just blow him away with a crazy offer. I might be wrong about that, but I feel like the Mets aren't going to, they're going to look at the market and probably find somebody who's serviceable and maybe a little less expensive, especially if they really are digging deep into Bauer and other guys. So I don't know. Something about Springer throws me off, but I feel like McCann is, to me, at least right now at this moment, December 7th, whatever, he's going to most likely end up as a Met out of those three. And the rest are definitely possibilities, but that's just the way I kind of see it.
I think the only way that you end up with James McCann is if you definitely end up with one of the other three. I don't think I think you definitely are getting James McCann if you don't get Real Muto right now.
So you're saying basically McCann is not going to be the first guy signed. Do you get what I'm saying? Like if they're signing people, he's not going to be their first free agency. That's what you're saying? Their first signing of the offseason?
So I actually don't know 100% certain if James McCann necessarily comes after a Bauer or a Springer. What I think a James McCann signing does, it would essentially make the rest of the Mets roadmap much clearer, though. If you sign James McCann, the message I think that they will be trying to send is that they want Bauer and Springer too.
Right.
I think James McCann is the avenue you take if you are looking to sign Bauer and Springer, not one or the other, both.
Got it.
That's the key. If you are looking to get both, you have to commit to James McCann or someone even cheaper than James McCann.
Right.
At catcher, which is fine. I think James McCann, if you can get Springer and Bauer, becomes worth it. However, James McCann by himself does not intrigue you as much as JT Realmuto. I mean, the difference between JT Realmuto and James McCann is extremely significant, and anyone who says it's not doesn't know what they're talking about.
I like
there's
that.
there's a major gap.
Right. Okay. So let's we'll get to the catcher market a little bit later. I want to talk just real last thing about pitchers, and then we're going to move on to the outfield. So let's say Bauer doesn't happen, right? We both agree that it's really up in the air wherever he goes. Where do the Mets go from there? Do they go for one of these veteran guys on the list here? Do they stick with what they got? What do you think their step is if it's not Bauer? If Bauer is off the table, where do they go?
So the name that reporters have been focusing on the last week, Martino and I believe Mike Puma has talked about this as well. Jake Odorizzi. That's the name that keeps coming up, and it's because a lot of teams really are under the belief that what happened this past season for him was a little bit fluky given the 60-game schedule, and he also dealt with a blister at one point during the season. So a lot of teams don't think he's going to be nearly as bad next season. As you can see, a 6.59 ERA in 4 starts. 4 starts, keep that in mind.
Right. And I
But
want
look
to
at
point
the year
out
before.
too, look at their projection. Right now, they're projected to be under 4.2, which isn't great, but somebody that I think they're even Baseball Reference sees that he's going to have a better year than what he did.
Yeah, and I think Jake Odorizzi is someone. Also, he's worked with Jeremy Hefner before, and Trevor May was his teammate, who is now obviously with the Mets,
Right.
and they apparently are very close. So I do think that that's a name that we should all be keeping an eye on. That being said, actually, shortly before this show started, Jim Duquette, sorry, he was saying that apparently the Mets are not currently the leader in the pack for Jake Odorizzi, but that could be a number of things. One, it either means they have their sights set on someone else, or that he is more of a fallback option currently.
Odorizzi's a low-end veteran guy, not going to command a lot of money. You don't think they even entertain the idea of, hey, maybe let's bring in a Tanaka, or let's bring in a Lester, or let's bring in one of these proven guys that might command a little more money than an Odorizzi might, but he's also coming off a better season or a better career or whatever the case may be. Do you think they could do something like that, or it's just like Bauer or low end? Like there's no in between, it's either the top guy or one of the lower type guys. You know what I mean? Or am I not giving Odorizzi enough credit? Sorry to cut you off, but is that something too?
I think that the latter part about not giving Odorizzi enough credit, I think is actually a fair point, because I think there's a lot of teams in baseball that view Odorizzi as a smart gamble. And I think that people look at Jake Odorizzi and see value. It might not necessarily be on opening day look like you are putting out the best pitcher from the free agent market or one of the better pitchers from the free agent market. But I think by mid-season or the end of next season, you could go back and look at Jake Odorizzi and say he gave similar production to anyone else towards the top tier, besides Trevor Bauer, besides Charlie Morton maybe. Right. He gives you similar value. I don't, and at a very much more reasonable price. And I think the fear you run into with this starting pitching market, and we've seen it already, is that you don't want to be the team that overpays for Masahiro Tanaka. You don't want to be the team that takes the gamble on James Paxton, who has never pitched over 160 innings in his career in a season.
Right.
And to my knowledge, at least.
No,
Jose Quintana, if you overpay for Jose Quintana, something went very wrong.
Right. No, as a Yankee fan, we'll talk about them on a different episode. But yeah, I don't have any interest in Quintana. But Paxton, yeah, his most innings in his career is 160, back in 2018 with Seattle.
Yeah, and I mean, given he's been dealing with shoulder issues, James Paxton's the type of guy you sign as a bring into spring training and hope he brings significant value type guy. Like you said, he gets a major league deal, but you don't want to be the team relying on James Paxton to fill out the rotation as your number 2.
In your eyes right now for the Mets, it's looking like Bauer, Odorizzi, and then the rest are kind of like it is what it is for the Mets. But those are the 2 guys you see as like the top 2 targets really for them as far as starting pitching goes.
I do. And I think that truly speaking, outside of those 2 options, you start having to consider the trade market, which right now is consisting of Sonny Gray, Blake Snell, and reportedly, to some extent, Zach Wheeler. Now, Zach Wheeler is the interesting one.
Did you hear what the owner came out and said the other day? The Philly,
yes,
he wouldn't trade him for Babe Ruth or. I mean, you wouldn't trade Zach Wheeler for Babe Ruth? I don't know. I think I'd probably pull the trigger on that one. I'm not a GM or owner, but
Let's see what happens before I believe what that owner has to say. I don't. Owners have to say stuff like that. And here's the other thing too that you have to consider is that you, as an owner, you cannot openly tell your fans we are not going to spend money. Right, at least right off the bat.
not in Philadelphia either.
Yeah.
Maybe if
And
you're in Seattle, or one of these smaller, not knocking them or anything, but one of these smaller markets, you might be able to get away with that. In Philadelphia, these fans are as crazy as it gets. They're hungry. They want a winning season. You can't come out and basically tell them you're not gunning for everything.
yeah, and especially because it appears they've already ruled out their pursuit of keeping JT Realmuto,
Right.
which now I don't know that I think it's still too early to rule out your chances of re-signing him. That being said, the fact that they are already saying that is basically telling their fans that they're waving the white flag for next season.
Right.
And as a result, you have to be very careful about what your next move is if you're going to dump salary. So they need to come out looking like they made a decent deal or got rid of a large salary, which right now with Zach Wheeler on paper, you don't look at the Phillies and say that they could somehow get better from a Zach Wheeler trade, and they won't.
Right.
But the goal, I think, would be is that you can make a Zach Wheeler trade without it being leaked too publicly, although that appears to have already fallen against them on that.
Yeah.
I think if it was up to them, they would pull off the very similar to the Tom Seaver Midnight Massacre trade that happened when he was with the Mets, I think in 74. They dealt him in the middle of the night, and the next day it was in the news, and that was about it.
And that was a big part of that trade, if I'm correct, is because of that reporter from New York, right? Said something about Seaver, like his family or something, and he got frustrated and he wanted out after that. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, and I think
rest in peace, Tom Seaver too, by the way.
Yeah, rest in peace. He very sad earlier this year with that. Although I'm very happy to see that Cohen wants to make a statue for him.
Me too. That's awesome.
That's going to be great. I think that the problem in this era is that leaks happen all the time, and now you have social media to push those leaks. And what happened probably was Middleton was angry that it came out that these leaks were a thing, that this was a real thing that they're considering. And so he wants to make it seem like there's nothing that's going to happen. And the other thing too is that you try to drive up the price by saying that you're not dealing him. That's the thing too there. I don't think though that Zach Wheeler is actually unavailable though. Do I think that he's guaranteed to get dealt? No. Do I think it's very possible? Yes. I don't know. What do you think with that?
That's a good question. I think what you just said is exactly what I think. I think he's not absolutely unavailable, right? I think he is available, but I think they're gonna really try to drive up the market as much as they can. And if they get blown away by something where they just, an offer you can't refuse, the old mafia term, then yeah, they're going to pull the trigger. But I think it's going to take some real pulling to actually get him out of there. So I'm going to say that he doesn't get traded this year unless the Phillies are awful by, July and the deadline, or hopefully the season goes as planned. Then it could happen. But I don't think it's a winter meetings type of deal. And I don't think it happens this year. I think it's more realistic maybe to happen next offseason. If they continue to stink, if they're in shambles cap-wise, they might end up making a lot of moves. But we'll see. I'm not predicting anything with him yet. The next thing I want to get to outfielders, because that's one of the biggest needs, center field specifically for the Mets. So Springer, obviously the cream of the crop here. After him, big-time drop-off. So let's talk, obviously, the big fish here, George Springer. What do you think is the Mets courting to him? What do you think they're selling to him? What type of contract is he asking for? Give me your whole intel with George Springer.
I think the winner of the George Springer bidding is probably going to be looking at a deal 5 years north of $100 million. I think that's the winner of the George Springer deal. I I think your pitch to George Springer right now is that he gets to join this young group of talented hitters, um, with the richest owner in sports now. And
Must feel good saying that, huh?
yeah, after years of the Wilpons
Yeah,
torture,
yeah,
yeah,
it's absolutely.
yeah. And I think it's a new beginning for George Springer, coming from Houston where things were really getting toxic towards the end, despite them still being successful.
Sure.
I think that it would be a welcome change for George Springer. And I think that George Springer, to me, and I've been thinking this for a while, he kind of reminds me of when the Mets signed Curtis Granderson in 2013. And the Curtis Granderson signing had a lot of different meanings. One, from the production standpoint, the Curtis Granderson in 2015 was one of the most underrated seasons from an outfielder I've seen in my lifetime. A 5.3 F.WAR, yet no one talked about him as being one of the best outfielders in the sport, and he was not an all-star that season, or talked about as an all-star that season.
Yeah, he finished 18th in MVP voting. I didn't
Yeah.
even know that.
Yeah, and look at that production. OPS plus of 127, 26 home runs, 70 RBI. Leading off for the team, he had 70 RBI. I mean, I think that that was an incredibly underrated season. But overall, the other thing with Curtis Granderson is that the Mets were just trying to get out of their rebuild at that point. And the signing of Curtis Granderson was the thing that started to give the Mets respect and credibility again. And his signing really did improve that. It made it much easier for the Mets to attract players. It even convinced David Wright to stay long term. It was a big deal for the Mets at that point. And Curtis Granderson had the impact that is lasting still. I mean, Curtis Granderson was one of the best free agent signings the Mets have made in a long time. And
it's interesting you say that because like somebody like myself, being a Yankee fan on the outside, I didn't really obviously 2015 it did incredible things. 2016 they were a great team. You don't really like hearing you say it now. It's kind of making a lot of sense because I never really looked at it that way. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers and listeners probably, unless they're diehard Mets fans, probably didn't really understand the magnitude of it either, especially the lasting impact that you just mentioned. Because I didn't. To be full disclosure, I knew he played well with them. He had some big moments, this and that, but I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I think with Springer, it's interesting because he'll probably be if he's healthy and stuff, you would think he'll probably do it for a little bit longer than Granderson did with the Mets if he were to sign there. And you probably think he's going to put up around probably the same 25, 30 home runs, right? I think that's what he had, Granderson, that 1 year. But you would expect him to kind of do that for a longer time, especially in the way the game is played today. 26, and then he had 30 in 2016. So 59 RBIs. That's funny. That must hit a lot of solo homers.
Yeah, it was a lot of solo homers that
a lot
season.
of solo homers for him. But yeah, no. So I like that comparison a lot. So you're thinking, so really your selling point to him is, hey, we can pay you. We're in win now mode. You're out of the American League, right? I mean, I think that's got to play a role in it. You don't have to worry about, Astros and Yankees. And I don't know what his mindset is like, Springer. I have no idea, but maybe he wants to get away from all that. He doesn't want to be anywhere near it. That could be a selling point. And in a lineup full of lefties, I mean, he fills a huge role, right? A huge role, solid fielder.
Yeah.
You can play him in center. You can rotate him in right. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a tremendous fit for the Mets. But now we got to play the other side of it. Let's say he goes somewhere else. Anybody here you like? Anybody within the organization you're just like, hey, let's roll with them? Anybody you slide from right to left to center? What's your contingency plan if you lose out on Springer? Where do the Mets go?
So admittedly, I think your contingency plan really is quite weak. I really don't think that there's another center fielder on that list that even comes close to giving you George Springer production.
No, yeah.
Jackie Bradley Jr. is good, but I would be very hesitant to give him a lot.
He had the 1 year. I want to pull up his numbers too, because you had that 1 year where he hit well over 300, if I'm not mistaken.
This past year, he was also very solid.
Yeah, 283 this past year. Or no, he didn't hit 2016. He finished with 270. He was an all-star that year. That was the year I remember he actually did some good things. But yeah, like you said, I mean, a major drop off with these
Yeah.
guys.
And I think the next option is Brian Goodwin. I think with Jackie Bradley Jr. and Brian Goodwin, though, you're looking at signing a platoon partner as well, possibly even bringing back Jake Marisnik. That's about as far as there really is with the center field market. Albert Almora Jr. is another option if you want to go defense first.
Right.
I don't think you get anything close to what you're looking for from George Springer, though, with any of these options. They honestly, all of these players on this list combined could combine for the same WAR that George Springer has next season. That's how much of a drop off we're looking at.
Right. So maybe I'm pushing it here, and you can tell me if I am. Is there anybody on the left or right field market that you can maybe slide to center field, or no? Or
Hunter Renfroe is the name.
Renfroe, or what about real quick? I want you to talk about Renfroe, but what about Conforto? Like, he's just no chance he could be a center fielder at all.
I think that experiment, along with Nimmo, we've tried it a decent amount. It has not worked.
Right.
Sure. Can you do it? Yes. Will it be a good defensive alignment? No. If you're looking to improve your pitching next season, putting a bad defense behind them is not going to help.
Right. Especially in that big ballpark too.
Now, Hunter Renfroe is very interesting because he was god-awful.
Yeah,
he was god-awful in 2020. That being said, his track record is pretty solid, actually, and his defensive metrics, actually, are pretty good, almost across the board, no matter what position you put him at. And I think Renfroe really could be a solid addition. He's a right-handed bat. That, honestly, the more you think about it, it makes more sense to go Renfroe than Bradley, even. I don't think that Renfroe is a top option by any means.
No.
I think Renfroe is the option you turn to after you've lost out on Springer. And I don't even know that you turn to him first then. I think there's a possibility you even look at the trade market at that point.
That was going to be my next question. Is there somebody out there at center field, or again, that can rotate to center field, that you have your eyes on, or not really yet? Has there anybody been out there or not yet that you've noticed?
So there are two names that I think you're going to hear this offseason. One of them is Charlie Blackmon, who, despite being a phenomenal hitter,
right,
is by no means a fit for the New York Mets.
No.
His defense has been going downwards for a long time now. He is getting up there in age. He has a bloated contract, despite still being very effective as a hitter. So, first, if you want a center field, and he's left-handed. So,
right.
Really,
yeah. And they've been playing him a lot in right field, if I'm not mistaken, too.
Yes, he moved to right field last season. He wasn't even good defensively there. So,
yeah, so that's probably off the table for the Mets if they're smart about it. Yeah.
Yeah. The other name that you can look into is Kevin Kiermaier.
That's a defensive wizard right there.
That's a defensive first move, but there are two things. One, he's a left-handed hitter, so that doesn't help that issue. And he's not a good hitter, just in general. And two, he also comes with a contract that is not ideal right now for what he's been giving value-wise. And his injury history is very murky as well. Now, the plus side to that is that he is very likely to come cheap in a trade. In terms of prospect capital, you are not going to give up much of anything to get him. If you take his whole contract, which is what I would think the Mets would do in this scenario, is you can probably get Kevin Kiermaier for a player we named later at best.
Right.
And maybe a very low level prospect. Kiermaier on the trade market is the one to watch if they're going to do that route, if they miss out on Springer. And Jackie Bradley Jr. are probably the two names.
In your opinion, most likely, and what's your pitch to them? What kind of deal do you think they get for the Mets? Because I do think third baseman, I think we all agree that it's something they got to address. They have to address third base. So where do you think they go? What's the price and what's their kind of selling point to them, especially if they're trying to convince a guy like Simeon, hey, let's move you to third base, you know?
So I think Simeon has been a big beneficiary of Matt Chapman being next to him on the right side all the time.
Right.
Well, on the left side of the infield, hit to his right.
Right.
But I think he's been a major beneficiary of it, and his defensive metrics have been positive over the last 2 years. But I think that Chapman has helped a lot with that, because prior to that, Simeon was one of the worst defensive shortstops in baseball. And I think that Simeon, and I think a lot of teams realize that still, that he's a beneficiary of Chapman being next to him. Do I think he's as bad as one of the worst infielders in baseball defensively? No. Do I think that he's one of the better defensive shortstops? Probably not, though. So I think Simeon has a lot of reason to look into being a third baseman and a second baseman. This past season, he was not that good, but I mean, he was an MVP candidate just a year ago.
Right.
So his bat can handle playing third base, and I'm sure he can handle playing second or third. And I think a lot of teams realize that and would like to consider signing him for that. That being said, for the Mets specifically, their first target is going to be DJ LeMahieu. That's just going to be the case. Whether LeMahieu plays second and McNeil moves to third or vice versa, LeMahieu is their first target. Jeff Passan said it as much earlier today for that position. Not necessarily that they're going to sign that he's their first target overall, because he probably isn't.
Right.
But
right. I get
he's
it.
there for that. If they had a choice right now of who to plug into third base, it probably is DJ LeMahieu, almost certainly.
So let me ask you this then with LeMahieu in regards to him. If you go out and you make him, like you said, maybe not the top priority, but 1B, right, to whether Bauer's 1A or Springer's 1A, 1B or 2 possibly. Does he take the more money offer, or do you see LeMahieu taking more years with somebody? What do you think is more likely for him?
So everything that I've been reading so far says he wants that fifth year.
Right.
That fifth year is really becoming almost non-negotiable, and it looks like he can get the fifth year. Like, it really is looking like, with a robust market that includes the Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, and Blue Jays, plus others.
Right. Big time money spenders for sure.
Yeah. I think you have a good shot of getting that fifth year if you're DJ LeMahieu's agent and camp right now. I think we've always been talking about LeMahieu back to the Yankees, and Jeff Passan was talking about this today. But like Jeff Passan's saying, it's not a given with a market like that.
Right.
That as much as LeMahieu might want to go back to the Yankees, at the end of the day, he's likely going to take the team's offer that's a fifth year if there's only one.
Yeah, well, you got to do what's best for you, right? At the end of the day. That's why I'm not sold on him. Obviously, as a Yankee fan, I want him back, but I'm not sitting here saying it's guaranteed. It's guaranteed, you know?
Don't think that the Mets will go further than someone like Justin Turner on that. And I don't think Justin Turner's coming back to the Mets. I really don't think that's happening. Sandy Alderson is actually the one who burned the bridges most with Justin Turner. So I think it's unlikely that they're going to turn back to him. I think Marwin Gonzalez is someone you could bring in regardless of what you do, given he can play every position. And he's more of a utility guy, truly speaking, at the end of the day. So I think Marwin Gonzalez is really not contingent on what they want to do at third base, because I don't think he's a starting third baseman.
Gotcha. So you wouldn't want to play him at third base 100 games, something like that?
Yeah. I think Marwin Gonzalez is the type of guy you bring in, keep on your bench, let him play a different position 4 or 5 days a week.
Okay.
And, you just move around the diamond, spot people when necessary. I think he provides a lot of value as a super utility that can hit well. It's kind of like along the lines of what the Mets were somewhat considering after the 2015 season when they thought about getting Ben Zobrist. it would
Right.
fill that similar type of role. And even to a lesser extent, the role they intended to have when they signed Jed Lowry, which obviously did not
Ah,
ever come to fruition or anything close to it.
yeah, he's not a fan favorite for Mets fans, that's for sure.
Yeah, I saw him more when I was covering the Brooklyn Cyclones that season than I did of him in a Met uniform. So, I mean, that tells you all you need to know about the impact Jed Lowry is going to forever be known for.
Yeah. That was Brody's one of his finer moves, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately, I hate to say it, it might not even be in the top 3 worst moves he's made,
Oh,
though.
yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to do a show on that. So obviously, catcher is a huge need for the Mets. We've talked about this at great length, but I always enjoy our discussions on this. So, Real Muto obviously is the big fish here. I know getting him prevents you probably from doing some of the other things that the Mets want to do. What's same type of question as before? What's the realistic possibility they go after him? What type of deal does he command? And how do you think that plays out with Real Muto specifically?
So, I truly think the reports last week seem to indicate from Andy Martino and Robert Murray that the Mets have shifted their focus to James McCann, and that JT Realmuto is the one. It as much as they would love to have JT Realmuto, the money is just going to be significant to a point that it would impact their ability to get a George Springer, Trevor Bauer, or even both. And so I think that they're going to choose to go the James McCann route right now, which is a significant downgrade. But if it results in you getting Springer and Bauer, it becomes worth it. And now the reports have suggested that he's going to get a 4-year deal. A 4-year deal is significantly pricey for James McCann. I mean, a 4-year deal to a guy who's had 2 good seasons, essentially. One of them being a 60-game season.
Right.
So I don't think that there's a possibility that it would be an overpay to get James McCann. And we'll see. They might not do 4 years. Well, I don't know what the actual negotiations have shown so far about the Mets' willingness to go to that point. It certainly seems like the Mets are the favorites currently. And I think that you're looking at James McCann coming to New York right now with the Mets. I think Realmuto's market becomes very murky from there because I don't know who gives him the money. It sounds like the Phillies consider themselves out. The Yankees probably are not going to go for Realmuto.
Nah, I'd be stunned. I'd be absolutely stunned if they did.
So the thing to keep in mind though with the catcher market, the catcher might be the first move they make. And the reason I say that is because the first move outside of Trevor May, I should say.
Right.
And the reason I say this is because I think the catcher move is the one that gives you the roadmap to the rest of the Mets offseason and what they plan to do. Because if they sign James McCann, the indication is clear. They want Bauer and Springer. Not one, they want both. If they sign Realmuto, then they are committed to only signing one of the others at maximum, probably. I don't see a scenario where they would sign Realmuto and then get Springer and Bauer as well.
McCann looks like he's going to garner a 4-year deal. How likely is it he gets that?
Truly speaking, I think it's about 50-50 right now. I think there's a decent shot it ends up just being 3 with a club option or a vesting option, which would be much more preferable, I think, to most people.
Right.
And including myself on that. For all I know, what we've heard so far means nothing with that. Because if they lose that, let's say George Springer signs tomorrow.
To the Mets.
No, to someone, not the Mets, I should.
Oh, okay, to somebody other than the Mets. Okay.
If that were to happen, the Mets might change their mind completely and just say, you know what, let's get Realmuto and Bauer instead. Right. Or they could still stick with the James McCann situation and say, let's go get LeMahieu and Bauer. Those are all options. I think the first domino that drops of the big four could be a telltale sign for the rest of the offseason of what we should expect. If one of the big four right away goes to the Mets, let's say it's Springer, as you said initially with that.
Right.
I think at that point they're going to sign James McCann shortly after if they haven't already.
And just for
I think
those
they're
at
gonna go
home,
back.
the big four is Springer, LeMahieu, Bauer, and Real Muto, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And LeMahieu, I think, is less of a telltale sign than most because I don't think LeMahieu is actually like, I think if the Mets had to rank their choices, LeMahieu's probably third or fourth. I think Bauer and Springer are 1 and 2, and I actually think Bauer is 1 deep down to them.
Wow.
Because I think the way they view it is the disparity is so significant between Bauer and the next best pitcher, and their biggest weakness last season was pitching.
True. That's true. That's true. See, I was actually going to make the counter argument, and you're kind of making me flip, but I was going to make the counter argument that a guy like Springer might be their biggest priority because, like you said with Bauer, the guy after him that's available is not good, like not comparable to him. So that's why I kind of lean towards Springer as being the Mets' top priority. But again, you can look at it however you want to for anybody at home too. Percentages. Percent chance Real Muto is a Met 2021.
30%.
Percent James McCann is a Met 2021.
I'd say, well, I guess the reverse would be 70%.
All right. And then so nobody in the field, though. If they don't end up with either of those guys, do they go one of these lower names? I know you talked about Jason Castro on the phone. We discussed this before doing the show. Is there any other name here that you think is a possibility or another route they could go, or they're really going to hone heavy on those guys?
I think it's one or the other, truly speaking. Maybe I should leave like a 1 or 2% sliver for someone else, but I really don't think there's a high chance that it's someone else. Maybe it's possible they sign one of those other options like Jason Castro as a backup, but I don't see them going with Jason Castro on opening day. As much as I actually don't think that's a bad solution, I don't think they're going to do it.
Okay. And there's nobody that I might not know of or people at home that the Mets have within the organization, nobody around right? Nobody in the trade market maybe for them.
Mean, this is the problem with the Mets too, is that they don't have any depth in the catcher department specifically.
Right.
And so, I mean, right now, if they were to enter the season, their starting catcher duo would be Tomas Nido and Ali Sanchez. Neither one which you want as a starter. Nido could be a backup.
Where's Rene Rivera? He was my guy. What happened to him?
Currently, I believe.
Oh gosh, hey, I thought he was the savior. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so there's not much they have there for on their plate. That's for sure. So they got to end up. In my opinion, just hearing you talk about it, I think they got to end up with one of these two big guys in McCann or Real Muto. And if not, then you're gonna have to sign somebody because you're not getting through a full season with Nido and Sanchez, right? That's the guy's name. What was the other guy's name? I don't even remember who said. Sanchez, yeah. Not Gary Sanchez. Ali Sanchez. Yeah. Like it, love it, hate it. Mets signed Trevor May. What are your thoughts?
Love it. I think Trevor May was arguably according to Fangraphs, he was the second best free agent reliever on the market this offseason, behind Liam Hendricks. And 2 years at roughly $18 million. I don't see how you could dislike that signing. I think Trevor May is becoming one of the better relievers in baseball. His K rate is very high, as you can see on the screen, 14.7 Ks per 9 this past season. Right. And no season below 12.7, below 11.1 since 2015.
Right.
He's becoming one of the better relievers in the sport. And some of his pitches, especially his fastball, have very wicked movement, and I think that he's one of the best relievers in baseball that we have not talked about really. And I think he brings a stabilizing force to the Mets bullpen that we very much needed going into next season. And it makes it a lot easier to potentially stomach moving Seth Lugo back to the rotation if they really choose to do that. I don't believe they're going to choose to do that.
I hope they don't. I liked him in the closer role, man. I did. Or even a setup role. I thought he wasn't bad as a reliever, whatever you put him at. I think their rotation's already deep starting wise. I don't think it's totally necessary, especially if they get a Bauer or somebody, Odorizzi or somebody else. I think he's better suited for them in their bullpen because I still think they have some question marks while it has improved, at least on paper. I think they have some question marks there. But I personally, I love it. I love the signing too. I'm with you. I'm just looking at some of his numbers here. I think he's clearly, look at his season last year, 2019. It's a 2.94 ERA, 65 appearances. I like it a lot. I think it's a step in the right direction for them. It's going to, especially with, Betances is a question. Yeah, Betances is still with them, right? I thought it was a 1-year deal.
Yeah, he accepted the player option.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So Betances is a question mark. Edwin Diaz is obviously a question mark, a big question mark. And they still have some other guys there that are decent. But I like May. I think he gives them some stability. And I really like what they did with that. So I love it. All right. I appreciate your time, man. It's such a pleasure. I love talking to you, brother. You're so insightful with this stuff. I hope everyone at home sees it as well. This is just our first episode. We have so much more to come. Basically, what we're going to do is just talk baseball constantly. Next episode, we'll probably touch on the Yankees. We'll see how we do. But Josh, as always, my friend, it's been a pleasure. And we'll talk soon, all right?
Yeah, been a pleasure. Glad